Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our demonstration on time billing in Design Manager. My name is Brad, and I'll be hosting the demonstration. If you have questions during the webinar, feel free to enter them into the questions pane on your GoToWebinar panel. If the question is outside of the scope of today's discussion, please email them to support@designmanager.com. And lastly, if you missed a portion of the webinar or want to review any of our past discussions, go to our YouTube channel at Design Manager Inc. for a complete listing of all sorts of topics, including our quick start videos, short helpful tutorials, and all of our comprehensive webinars that we categorize in our project management and accounting courses, along with all of our weekly webinars as well. In today's webinar, we'll be discussing the basics of time billing, how to input services such as design time, travel, CAD work, etc. into Design Manager, and we're going to use a few different methods to do so. I'm going to point out some of the benefits along the way, along with some of the lesser known features and settings that you may find particularly useful. Now, as this webinar is an overview of time billing, some of the topics we discuss tangentially, such as invoicing, design services, and budgeting, reporting, etc., are examined in greater detail in other webinars. So I'll be sure to point those out along the way as they arise. Lastly, as we have developed a comprehensive time import system and continue to enhance that system, that functionality more than warrants an entirely separate discussion, which can be viewed on our YouTube channel at the Time Billing Import for ProCloud. And you can review the entire import system, which also does touch upon some of the topics we'll be discovering today. And though the import system provides amazing flexibility and can dramatically decrease the time required to input entries, a lot of the fundamental concepts that we're discussing today are more than applicable. In fact, go hand in hand with a lot of the functionality of that system as well. Okay, let's get started. So how you decide to enter billable time depends mainly on two factors. Primarily, how do you and your client want billable time details displayed on the invoice? They can either be summated or listed individually, or a combination of the two, and each project can be configured differently depending on the needs of a particular client. Secondly, what reporting or analysis capabilities of time billing are useful to you and your company? Let's take a look at two primary methods for recording entries for services performed. First, we can use our project specification window to record time entries, the same window you are comfortable with inputting all of your merchandise. And this provides the ability to enter all of these services using the same singular window that you're comfortable with, and still provides the enhanced functionality and capabilities of the underlying time employee time system. Now, to utilize those additional features, some initial configuration is needed. So let's go through those concepts first. And we'll begin with the project time tier concept. You can have up to 3 separate levels, let's call them, of billing rates and costs, and can assign those to each project on the project window defaults tab. So to access, we go to our project tab, click on our projects button to access the project window. Let's take a look at our Brown project. I'll click on the defaults link, and we can see our time billing tier. For the Browns, we have it assigned to tier 1. For the Carters Pennington home, we have assigned for tier 2. And the Carter's other project, their Brigantine Beach home, is assigned to tier 3. So I've associated a single tier, a unique tier, to each of our 3 active projects. Very simple. Another concept that's integral to the entire employee time system is the idea or the concept of the time activity glossary. We can access that on our project tab, remaining there in our lists and glossaries frame. And the very last entry on our default menu is time activities. Time activities really are a classification of the service that's being provided, and it's extremely useful in reporting and makes data entry faster and more consistent throughout the process. Let's take a look at our designing or design time activity as an example. And we can see the available functionality on each time activity. We have the unique code, the more descriptive name of the time activity, whether or not it's currently active or inactive with the inactive option in the top right corner. We have the description. This will be the default description, as we'll see down the road a little bit in our discussion today, that actually is automatically applied when we're using this particular time activity. That, of course, can be amended or overwritten as necessary. And finally, we have the time billing rates selection. Our design time activity is set to use the cost or rate of the employee. Okay, well, let's review an employee and we'll circle back to time activities in a moment. We'll see how these two concepts, well, several concepts, quite honestly, are entirely interrelated. Employees are also on our lists and glossaries, conveniently listed right next to our time activities. Let's get our project window out of here. We have 2 employees listed, and let's go ahead and edit our employee for Ashley Brandon. Obviously, there's a lot of information on this window with several tabs and links to record different information used throughout Design Manager, but we're going to be focusing primarily on the Time tab. And here we can see these pairs of rates and costs for all of our tiers. So we can set the default rate to the client for each employee for each of the tiers. Now, the cost is optional. You don't have to input that if not desired, but it does become beneficial when you're trying to review the true profitability of a project on certain reports like the profit analysis and other reports. In our case, the cost logically remains the same for the employee, but we charge our client different rates for the different tiers. Beneath the standard set of tier rates and costs are our exception grid. The time activity exceptions can be used to override each of the various rate and costs for an employee for a given type of service. For example, we have consulting, which is, as we can see, one of our time activities, and we want to charge a standard rate of $75 for each of the tiers, regardless of what's been input into the project. So we're using the exception to basically override our rate system and standardize it for the employee for any of the projects. So we can see that employees use time activities and employee time exceptions sort of lead us back to time activities. Again, that concept of all of these different areas being fully interrelated. Let's take a look at a few of our other activities to see what their time rate settings may be. Let's go to AutoCAD first. And we can see, unlike our design time activity, which used the cost and rate of the employee, this is configured to use the cost and rate entered below. So regardless of the employee's individual rates and costs for the tiers, our company wants to standardize CAD pricing for any employee, regardless of who does the work. So for tier 1, it's going to be $65 an hour, tier 2, $75, etc. So we're standardizing the billing fees regardless of employee for this particular, in our case, AutoCAD time activity. Let's take another example. How about travel? Our travel time activity is set to use the third of our time billing rate options. And this one says, use the cost and rate entered below only when the activity is on the employee's exception list. So what this allows us to do is to optionally override an employee's rate and time if they have a time activity exemption on their list, as the case of Ashley Brandon. So her time will be overwritten for travel because of the third option here. So unlike AutoCAD, which standardizes it, overriding it for all employees, using the third option lets you input an exception into the desired employees and only override those. Finally, if we go back to our employee for Ashley Brandon, let's imagine that Ashley is just getting started using AutoCAD. So we want to set a lower rate for her services to get her up to speed. So if we edit her exception, we can see that we're going to be charging $45 flat against all rates, using the final setting of always override the rate and cost with the values entered below, no matter what is in the time activity. So this is sort of the final override by having Ashley's AutoCAD time activity exception set to always, no matter what, use the rates below, regardless of any other settings. So as you can see, Design Manager can handle any series of billing needs you could possibly imagine to properly input your employees' times at the proper rate. Very sophisticated set of rate overrides, really allowing you to have just a completely flexible system to handle such desired rate changes for employees, projects, and time activities themselves. Okay. Lengthy discussion on employees and time activities. So let's shift our attention back to our specification window to see how we can input time just using our specification window that we're accustomed with for all of our merchandise needs. So we'll go to our project specifications window. Shrink that down just a bit. There we go. And we'll put in one of our projects. Let's take the Browns new townhome. And I'm going to go ahead and create a new item, just like I would for merchandise, by clicking the Add button. Now I've configured a few quick settings to make our demonstration roll along a little bit quicker, but also to show some other features available for you. So I've crafted some time descriptions, and I stored them in our remarks glossary. So I want to use my design description. I'm going to just simply select it from my remarks glossary, and just like that, I can use that as my item description as well. Very similar to using a time activity, as we'll see momentarily. Our location, I have one crafted just for time, so my invoice will sort and subtotal and group all of my time entries together. Let's see here, quantity, I'll put hours as our unit of measure. Sales category, I have one for professional services and time, perfect, so I can let Design Manager handle all of the accounting for myself. And now I'll click the Add button, as indicated with the green plus sign, to get to our component window. My description conveniently defaults down for me. And now I can select my component type to the very specialized option for time. And when I do so, notice how the window reformats itself. No longer am I dealing with vendors and ship tos, but rather I'm dealing with the two concepts we just reviewed, employees and time activities. I'll select Patrick Wolf as the employee. And I'll select an activity. How about we use the design? And when I do, based upon the combination of the employee and activity, Design Manager's selecting the proper cost and rates. We can look back at Patrick's employee and notice for a tier 1 project, which our Brown project was, we're using $125 as the rate and a cost of $50, just like we would imagine in this case. I have my hours already selected since as I added it on my item window. I'm calculating my extended cost and extended price. The entry date defaults to today's date, but I could certainly change that if necessary. As such, the taxable selection comes from my project, as you would imagine, for design services being taxable in my particular location. And I now have an option for non-billable. The non-billable option allows you to still record the time for the services and even include them on the invoice to the client without actually charging the client, in this case, the $250. Click OK, and just like that, I've crafted an item using my specifications window just for time services. And I'm still going to be able to use all of the additional functionality that's available with the employee time system. That's a singular item that would appear as a unique entry on the invoice to the client. But we can also have an item, a single item, for a particular time frame that we can use to accumulate all of our time entries into a single item. Now, what do I mean by that? Let's try another example. We're going to add another item. And in this case, we simply may call it design services or something to that effect, design services of December or what have you. I'll use the same location for time. I'll skip any quantities or unit of measures, and I'll use my professional services again for my sales category. Go ahead and add our time component. We can switch our type to time. I'll change my description. Let's just use our design again. We'll set Patrick as our employee. We'll use design activity again. And notice we already saw how the design manager will use the appropriate cost and rate based upon Patrick as the employee and designing as the activity. But if we change the activity to something else, such as consulting, design manager will still update the rate for us. Recall, in the case of the consulting time activity, in the case of our employees, we're always using the consulting exception. So rather than charging the $125 that we would imagine for a tier 1 project, we're overriding or using an exception for Patrick to standardize that at $75. So all of those functionalities to define our desired rate and costs are right there for us. And we don't need to remember to do so each time, which of course could be quite confusing and laborious. And we'll do 1 hour and perhaps change our date as such. And we're good to go. We'll leave it as billable. I could even add another time entry quite quickly using my OK Add option. I can change my time. Perhaps we have some travel to input. I have a travel description as well. We'll put this back on Patrick. We'll use our activity of travel. Design manager is getting the proper rate and cost for me, as we can imagine. Let's say we had half of an hour. Notice that the entry date is referring to the last entry date we used to keep our data entry as fast and as accurate as possible. So that's fantastic. Since we're entering all of our time for a given day, it really does make it easier for us rather than having to change each time. And maybe the travel time in this case, we decide to be non-billable. Click OK, and now we can see our single item for design services now with 2 individual time components. In the case of our travel time though, we have Patrick's cost, but no price is being included in the total estimated price for the client. We're still recording that behind the scenes, but I'm changing the rate to be 0 since it's non-billable. And there we go. And now we have our design services item that's being used to consolidate all of this individual time entry. So the client's going to see a single item on the invoice for all of the design services, but we're still going to have the ability to provide supplemental information if they want some more detail of what comprises that singular time design services entry on the invoice itself. The pros in this format are we're using the same window that we use for all of our merchandise and other specification entry, but still have the ability to use the underlying time system, the analysis from our time reports that we'll see in a bit, and the specialized invoicing features as well. But this does take a little extra time to input all of these entries and might not be the fastest way to do so. So let's quickly see how these items appear on the invoice to the client, and then we can examine a faster method of recording time right after. So let's jump to our accounting tab. We'll go to our client invoices window, and we'll create an invoice for the Brown project. Here are our two entries. This was our first example where we just had a single item that represents our time entry. And we have our second example where we're consolidating our time entries into a single item. We'll select them both. Click OK. Let's take a look how this appears. Okay, so I'm using both items are in my time location. Here's our first example. So if I use the one item per time entry method, I would show each of the individual entries all listed for the client and the price of each. In our second example, where I'm consolidating the information, I have one item on the invoice for a single value. But I also have what we call our detail of time charges, or our supplement. So the client could see, hey, what's in that design services? And we'll list out each of those individual time entries. In fact, look, there is our travel time where we indicate no charge. So the client can say, hey, fantastic, I wasn't charged for that, goodwill, etc. So all of the supplemental and supporting information is right there for us. Perhaps you don't like the detailed time charges. Well, there's another way to show that information as well. Let's reject this quickly. Edit our invoice. We'll jump to our Remarks tab, and I'm going to click Advanced. Doing so gets us right to our Project Advanced Options window Invoice tab. So I don't have to go all the way back to my project window. I can access it right from here as well. I'm going to turn off the time supplement, or the detail of time charges as it's also known. I'm going to set my design time to list, and I'm going to try a different option of show time details. Now, in this format, rather than having that subsidiary pages of that detail all of the time entries, we can list each of them immediately beneath the item itself in the body of the invoice itself. So rather than having a sort of secondary supplemental page, we can list each of the entries right beneath the parent item. And again, we can even see our no charge and those types of things. So you have all this flexibility and all of this enhanced features to show your client however they want the invoice configured for clarity and simplicity. Plus you have all the abilities to generate secondary or supplemental information to show if they want some more detail about all of your time charges. Okay, go ahead and accept that. Now, that's entering the time entries through the specifications window. Perhaps more commonly these days is actually using the employee time system itself as it was designed on the project tab, and we can see right next to our specifications is the employee time window. Shrink that down a little bit here. Now that configuration that we talked about for both time, activities, employees, etc., and the tiers, all of that definitely is applicable when using the employee time system as well, and that would all need to get done as well. And the employee time system also really hones that concept of how we want our time entries entered or recorded. Do we want to join them to a time billing item for consolidated invoicing? Or do we want to have each billable event make a new item in the project so they're all listed in the body of the invoice itself? And ultimately, that depends upon your company and how your individual clients want the services displayed on the invoice. Design Manager allows you the flexibility of both. Okay, let's take a quick peek back at our projects for a few additional features that are available for us. Let's switch over to the Carter's Pennington home. I'm going to jump to the defaults link, advanced markup, and on our project advanced options, I'm going to click my time selection, and I have several options here as well. First, we have the default location for time entries. You saw me using the time location. When using the employee time system, I'll automatically use that location right away. Don't need to input it manually each time. Same with our sales category. You saw me use the professional services sales category time and again. This will do so automatically for us. Further, there's an option that's set as only allow entries to be joined to items with the default sales category. So as I'm accumulating these time entries and attaching them to the parent item, this setting will prevent me from accidentally joining a time entry to, oh, I don't know, perhaps a couch or something along those lines, which I did not intend to do so. So it's ensuring that I'm only going to be using an item with that professional services sales category, which in turn, of course, is going to ensure that I have the right item selected, and moreover, that I'm using the proper accounting as desired as well. Okay, great. Beneath that, we have the Create Items options. Now, these settings allow us to configure how we want to record and, of course, ultimately display our design and other services on the invoice to the client. The first option, which our Carter's project is using, is the user can choose. Well, they can choose what? They can choose one of the settings beneath that. They could either create a new item that's going to create an item in the project for each time entry that's recorded and thus will appear individually on the invoice to the client, or they can use the join to item selection. In this case, when you're joining to a time item, each time entry will be compiled into a bucket item, let's call it, such as design services for December. In this case, the client's going to see a single item on the invoice, though the supporting documents, such as the time supplement and the listing of time details that we just saw, are all going to be available as well. Two options included with the join to time item selections are as follows: join only to the latest uninvoiced dated item. Bit of a mouthful, but that's what that means is that this option is going to ensure that users are joining their time entries to a, let's call it a dated time item, which we will see shortly, and that this item has not yet been invoiced to the client. Essentially, the goal here is to keep the proper time entries being joined to an item representing the desired period into which the entry was recorded, and further to avoid joining it to an item that has been invoiced previously. So that could perhaps cause a missing of billing, which, as we can imagine, is not desirable. The other option is to automatically create a monthly item. Well, this feature is going to have Design Manager create that time bucket item each month for us, so we don't have to remember to do so manually. Again, we'll see that momentarily. Okay. Now, quickly, back on our specifications. Let's consider that concept of the join to method. Now, There is the option to have Design Manager create the time item for us manually each month that we just saw. But if I'm not using that and I'd rather take the control of that back to myself or consolidate the control to myself, I can manually make such an item. Let's do so for the Browns project. I'm going to create an item in the traditional manner by clicking the Add button. And I'll use the description as I was just referring to. How about design services for December 2019? I will use my location of time, and actually, I don't even need to do so. Notice on the right-hand side, there is an option for time budget. When I select that, Design Manager reconfigures the window slightly and does several things for me automatically. First, it sets our units into hours, fantastic, and it brings down that default time location and default sales category that we just saw on the Project Advanced Options window time tab. So it's going to automatically do that for us. Further, it allows us to create a range of recorded time. This is where we can go ahead and input the calendar time frame that we want associated with this particular time time item. And I'll go ahead and put in beginning of December through the end of December. Notice I don't need to put in years there. I can just type in the month, space, date, and Design Manager will do the formatting for us. I can't do anything else. Notice that my ability to add components or edit, of course, can't do so yet, are all disabled. All I'm doing is fashioning this time item to be able to receive time entries that we'll see momentarily. Click OK, and there we go. Now, how do I use that item? Okay, very simple. That takes us back to our employee time window, and let's take a moment just to explore some of the features that are on this window for us. First, we can view or enter time in a few different ways. I can do so by employee, where I would enter in the employee that I desire, and I'd record time entries for all of my projects within a particular time frame. Further, I can even craft Design Manager to automatically default the employee that's associated with my Design Manager cloud account to automatically populate for us. And I can further have it configured only to input time entries for that given employee. I can also input time entries from the project perspective. I could put in a project code and enter in time entries for a variety of employees working on a particular project. That viewpoint's used a bit more when individuals aren't doing their own time entry, but rather a controller or someone who's managing all the time does it on a per project basis. Lastly, I could see all entries. So now I'm not entering for a particular employee or particular project. I'm seeing all of the time and being able to enter time for any employee or any project as well. I also have my options of what is the time frame of the entries that I want to review and or add into. I'm defaulting to today's entries, and I haven't added any yet. I can set for yesterday. Notice when I do so, both the date range changes, as does my calendar control on the right-hand side. I could do this week. I can start seeing some entries now. Last week, this month, last month, etc. And even a custom date range. I could review all the entries for the entire year up to today as well. As such, I could use my calendar control too. Let's say I wanted to see all of the entries just in November. I could just select all of November on the calendar control. So lots of ways to quickly see entries for a given employee, a given project, all entries in whatever time frame that interests me. And upon doing so, notice that we have our time summary frame in the bottom right corner, and it's going to show us the time range that we're referring to, how many billable hours I have, how many non-billable hours, and the total. A quick snapshot of all of the relevant information for the hours within a given time frame. Okay, let's go ahead and create some time entries now. We'll go by employee. And how about we focus on this month? And we'll do it for Ashley Brandon. And there we go. And I can already see entries that have been created for her already for this month. To create a new entry manually, I just click the Add button. And that brings us to our time entry window. I can select or input the project. How about we do the Pennington home? Let's say the activity was designing. Now, because the Carter's Pennington home allows me to choose between a new item and a join to a item, I can do so. I can select the new item and I immediately default my time, location, and sales category, or I could choose to join to an existing item as well. When I do choose to join, Design Manager's already selecting an item for me. How is it doing that? Well, back on our specifications for the Carter's Pennington home, I've already crafted one of those time bucket items that we saw when I did for the Brown project. So Design Manager's going out and finding the proper time bucket item that has the time frame that I'm interested in and is automatically selecting it for me, taking all the guesswork out. My taxable setting comes from the project as well. I can change the date, let's say a few days back. I could manually calculate the hours. I could also use the enter time selection, and I could put in the time frame that Ashley worked upon this particular activity of designing. Let's say she did from 9 to 11. And when I do, Design Manager automatically calculate the proper hours for us as well. Click OK. And there we go. And now we've crafted the item. And back on our specifications, in our design services for the Carter's Pennington home, we can now see that I'm beginning to accumulate those time entries. Let's do another. We'll almost do the same item to display the new item selection. So we'll put the same project in for the Pennington home. We'll do designing again. Back on the 16th to our time, just like we did last time. But rather than doing the join to item, as we did in our prior example, we'll select the new item and go ahead and click OK. I can see my time entry. But what's happened now is back on our specifications, here is our time bucket item. The new item does just that. It creates a new item within the specification, so it could be listed individually on the invoice itself, the ultimate goal. Let's do another example. Let's select the Carter's Brigantine Beach project, and in this case, we'll do some more designing. I cannot make a selection for my items. Why? In the Brigantine Beach home, back on our project advanced options, I can only join to time items. So I'm standardizing and fixing that selection. That's how I want this particular project to be crafted. I'm enforcing it there. So as I'm entering in our time, I only have the selection to join to a new item. Well, what does the reference number? I don't have a reference number selected already, but it's reading to me or indicating that a new item for December will be created. What? Automatically? Fantastic, that's great. Put in our design time hours, and we're good to go. Now what will happen in the case of the Brigantine Beach home? So I have my time entry created. Back on the specifications for that project, Design Manager automatically made that time bucket item for me. It crafted in the time range, did everything that we did manually, but because I have the setting for automatically create monthly time item, it does that for me. Standardizing all the data entry for us, not allowing me to forget to make my time items each month. Design Manager will handle all of that for us. We all know how important recording of time entries is, and the proper billing of all of our billable time. Design Manager does everything it can to standardize and smooth and automate that process for us. Okay, so now using the employee time system, fantastic way to input all of our time. It has one window. We can use all of our time reports, all of our invoicing features that we have seen already. I can limit my users to only access employee time if that's if they don't have any design services in the, any project management or procuring tasks, and all they do is billable time. We can lock down our Design Manager for only applying access to employee time and all of those types of features. And the invoicing looks just like it would through the specifications. If we use an example of some of the entries we just created, let's do another invoice for the Browns. We'll select our item, transaction description, design services. Remember, the transaction description for our invoices can be for internal use, but it can also be displayed on certain reports like the statement to the client if desired. 12/2019. And if we take a look at that invoice, here we go. And in this case, I'm just showing the amount to the client without having the time supplement and those types of things. Looks just like our last example. All of the features we use can be done either from the specifications or through the employee time as well. Okay. Great. Now, so we've talked about inputting, we've talked about configuring our projects, employees, and time activities. We saw how we can input time using our specifications window. We saw how we can use it using the employee time window displayed here, specifically designed for this process. Again, remember that we do have the time billing import that can be another avenue that you may want to use to record your time entries. Doing so outside of Design Manager in Excel and those types of features is all accessed through the employee, the employee time import accessed on your employee time window, which again, we have an entire webinar for, so please take a look at that when you have a chance as well. But there's other aspects to the entire time system, such as budgeting. You may want to propose a fixed or even variable budget of design services and be able to track the accrued time against that budget. Well, Design Manager allows you mechanisms to do that as well. Let's take a peek. Let's jump back to our project tab. We'll go into specifications and we'll go to our Brown project. Now let's create a new item and see some of these budgeting features for time that were a bit tucked away. Let's call this guy proposed time budget. We'll use our standard location for time and our sales category. Not that that's quite relevant yet, but we'll do hours as our units. We'll do our time budget selection. And here, let's say that our unit budget, let's say that we're going to estimate that our hourly time, we'll round it because we saw we have a variety of various time rates associated for the various activities. We'll say it's going to be 150 an hour. I could even put my quantity in so I extend my budget. And I could put in a particular time frame as we just saw, but if I want to do the lifetime of the project, perhaps I'll do the beginning of the year through the end in our example. This information is also being recorded on our pricing tab. The budget amount comes right over, but I want to ensure that I input my quantity of hours as well, and we'll see why. This format, where I've selected my time budget option, as we saw a few times already, input my unit budget or the hourly rate. Again, we're estimating or averaging against all of our various time activities. I'm estimating 10 hours for a total budget of design services for 1,500, along with the budget amount and quantity on the pricing tab provides us with a few amazing tools to track our budget. Now, let's take a look at how all of this works together. We'll save our proposed time budget item. Now let's jump back on our employee time. We'll go ahead and do one for Patrick. Add. Let's use the Brown project to see how this is going to work. Notice it's already grabbing my proposed time budget item. Why? Well, I do have one item created that also is for December, but it's already been invoiced. So design managers further finding what item has the desired time range and is not invoiced. Checks and balances throughout to indicate to ensure that we're not sending time to the incorrect item, etc. Let's just do design services, our example, and we'll just do a quick 1 hour. And we'll click OK. Okay, fantastic. We have our time entry crafted. Let's look back at our item in our specifications. Several things have occurred. One, we can start seeing our time entries be accumulated, and the total estimated price is exactly what it should be. 1 hour's work at $125 an hour. My quantity is updating for me automatically, fantastic, and it'll continue to do so as I add additional time entries. What's not changing is my budget quantity of hours, nor the budget amount. And if I want to maintain or review how I'm coming or how I'm accruing my hours against this budget, I can go to my reports, go down to our time building reports, and I want to look at my time budget analysis for our Brown project. Let's make this a bit larger. There we go. Here's our proposed time budget item. I can see my budgeted hours and budgeted design services price. Where I am so far, 1 hour at 125, that's correct, as are the hours and pricing, but I'm comparing it against my budget hours. So I can use this report to track precisely where I am against the number of hours and the price of the hours that I budgeted for the particular project. Great way to keep yourself abreast of how much time you're spending, how accurate your budgeting is doing for the number of hours you propose to the client, etc. All of which right embedded and encapsulated in that employee time system. Speaking of reports, since we just looked at our time budget analysis, by using our employee time system, or even through specifications, either method, all of these various time billing reports become available to us. Let's briefly go through those as our last segment in our discussion today. The employee time analysis. To what projects are employees allocating their time? I want to see where all of our employees are spending their time. Is one project absorbing more of our resources than desired, etc.? I could run this for a particular employee over a particular time frame using any of the ranges to narrow the scope of the report. I can sort it by project or by activity. I want to see what employees are working on what project, or I want to see what are employees doing on each project. Either way is you can do through the report, and both have quite a good deal of value in my opinion. So we can see for Ashley what project she's working on. Same with Patrick, and then I'm going to total all of my employees as well. But I could run it again with that other selection for activity. Now I'll see what Ashley's doing upon what project. So I'm focusing on the activity and which projects are to which projects I'm performing, or Ashley's performing those activities, rather than the project and what she's doing upon it. And the same with Patrick. And there we go. The employee time summary. I can now, very similar to the employee time analysis, but I want to see on a summated version. Well, what does that mean? Here, I can see what Ashley's doing over a given time frame. So I'm looking at how much time is she spending, both billable and non-billable, on each month. And the same for Patrick as well. The project time analysis sort of flips the focus. So now I'm going to be viewing what employees are working on each project and what they're doing. So rather than grouping and subtotaling by employee, I'm doing the same by project. So here I'm going to see each of my projects listed and the employees that work upon them. And there we go. So now I'm focusing on the Brown New Townhome. I'm seeing what employees are working on that project. Same with the Carter's jobs as well. And likewise with the employee time analysis, I could then change the focus rather than being by employee within the project, what activity within the project? What are we performing the most work on for each of our jobs? Just like that. So now I'm seeing what tasks are being performed and by whom for each of the projects. And we also have a project time summary as well. So now I'm looking at each of my projects. Where is our time on a per month basis? Billable versus non-billable. What this report is going to show us is it's an easy matrix to review of what time is being spent for a given month for each employee, whether it's billable or non-billable. So we can quickly see what employees' amount of time is being billed to the client and what's not. Are we giving away too many hours? Perhaps we need to analyze, are all of our hours being recorded, etc. Quick snapshot of, hey, are we actually billing the hours that we're recording? We saw a time budget analysis already, and now we have our time, work, and process report. What billable entries that have been recorded that are not yet invoiced to the client? Similar in concept to the work and process report for merchandise or other goods and services, but focusing solely on those specialized time entries or time components. We could sort this by project or by time activity, but in my experience, project is the way that most users sort of resonate with the report. And there we go. Now I can print this out and see all of my entries for each of my projects that's still yet to be billed to the client. So I can combine this with my work in process report and say, hey, what are my total future billings going to be? Because none of these entries would be on our traditional merchandise work in process report. So it's an idea of future billing of all of our billable time entries that are yet uninvoiced. So a whole series of reporting just for time entries, as you can imagine. And with that, that brings us to the end of our discussion on employee time and time billing today. I tried to discuss in depth many aspects related to recording employee time into Design Manager, either by using the specification window or the employee time window. We also discussed or alluded to the employee time import system, which again, please review that webinar when you have a chance. I went into great detail on the concepts of employees, time activities, time exceptions, and reviewed several advanced features to make time entries as user-friendly as possible when considering what rate should be used, those types of things, all of the checks and balances available for you to ensure that time's being recorded properly and ultimately invoiced properly. I tried to show some of the reporting capabilities and even quickly reviewed presenting and reviewing budgeted items for time as well. And with that, I'd like to thank everyone for joining the discussion today, and I hope you attend another of our free webinars in the near future. Take care and have a great day.